Hello again, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about the first of three things that I found when I investigated Jehovah's Witnesses that helped me to see that this was not God's one true religion on earth, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses claim to be. And that is investigating the organization. So, as I mentioned before, when I was first starting to look into the organization, I was too afraid to look at apostate information, sources that could be biased against Jehovah's Witnesses. So I tried to look at only unbiased sources, which of course really hindered my progress. But in any event, I started out with looking at the leaders of Watchtower. So starting at Charles Taze Russell, on to Rutherford, and through the rest of the history of the organization. And I thought that'd be a good place to start because I had personally done that in order to discount other religions, especially the LDS and Muslim faiths, looked at their origin, looked at the people that were behind the construction of the religion, and realized, well, there's no way that that's the true religion. So now I was trying to look at Watchtower the same way. So I started with Charles Taze Russell. Was he the man that I had been taught he was? And Jehovah's Witnesses do talk about him a bit. They claim he's not the founder because Jesus is the founder, but they try to downplay his influence, actually. They talk about the Bible students collectively, even though he, of course, made many decisions, predictions, and doctrinal implementations on his own. So I think it's okay to consider him the founder of the religion. And you know what? I might get some details wrong as I go through here. Please, I'm not here to present to you some secret information. I'm just sharing my story about what I found. Look everything up for yourself. That's the best advice I can give you. So when I started to look into him, I found some questionable things about his character. Thinking about why he separated from his wife and the situation surrounding that, the wealth he accumulated, an obsession with predicting the end of the world and other dates, and a very strong belief in pyramidology, which was weird. I couldn't believe when I started to read his books, there'd be hundreds of pages about how the pyramids are the greatest witness to prophecy. And he'd measure them, talk on and on about them. It was crazy. I had no idea before I read his books. And there were some controversies too about a miracle wheat scam and other things. And so again, I don't know how much is verifiable or not, but it wasn't great. And I think it's worth noting that Russell became an apostate of the religion that he had been raised in. So when he determined it didn't teach what the Bible teaches, he moved on and tried to come up with new ideas or borrow other people's ideas. But this is interesting because Jehovah's Witnesses don't really make it sound that way. The Proclaimer's book says, this history is of special interest to Jehovah's Witnesses because their present understanding of Bible truths and their activities can be traced back to the 1870s and the work of C.T. Russell and his associates, and from there to the Bible and early Christianity. But I take issue with that statement for three reasons. Number one, the present understanding of Bible truths that Jehovah's Witnesses hold to is wildly different from what Russell taught. And if you read his books that Jehovah's Witnesses have, like the organization, the governing body has them at Bethel, but they don't let Jehovah's Witnesses read them, that alone tells you something. But if you read them, you'll see that what Russell believed was totally different. Number two, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't the only group that can trace their activities back to Russell. So, for example, the International Bible Students that still exist today, of course, can trace their history back to Russell. And then number three, linking from Russell to early Christianity would require stepping back through several apostasies from many religions, and many of those religions still exist today. So they too can trace their activities back. So I really don't like that statement. It doesn't make any sense to me. And instead of giving any detail as to how this can be done, the Proclaimer's book just names some men kind of from the 1300s to the 1800s who held totally different beliefs and for the most part didn't meet. Many of them, their lifespans don't even overlap. So the history of the organization wasn't looking good in my mind. So, and what about his beliefs? You know, I go back to his earliest books, the ones he wrote for the Bible students and the ones he co-wrote before. And it didn't take long for me to see that I wasn't reading a man who was inspired by God. I was seeing something riddled with issues, tons of predictions of dates, tons of numerology, and then, as I mentioned before, this pyramidology, which shocked me because I realized like this guy was really into pyramids and it was weird. And it seemed to me his goal was to predict dates, especially the end of the world. Predict doomsday, which the scriptures specifically say that no man is going to know when Armageddon's going to come. And they specifically say that false prophets will predict these dates. So I don't know why that doesn't bother more people. But anyway, that seemed to be about him. And so I looked at Rutherford, and it seemed again that his personality wasn't great. It seemed too that it was really just by force that he sort of gained control of the organization. And then of course, different ones branched off at that time. So yes, his group became known as Jehovah's Witnesses, but who's to say that was God's doing and not just this sort of bully of a man? Also concerning, he helped to finish the Finished Mystery, Volume 7, and he made it seem like Russell had written that, but that was dishonest. Russell had died, and these writings were not Russell's writings. Others had definitely contributed to that book. He also said that changes in the organization were fulfillment of prophecies in Daniel and Revelation. And again, he liked prophesying the end of the world. There's also some evidence of him being sexist, racist, and this making money again. So it was concerning. And I don't, again, no one expects these people to be perfect. But it just sort of made me realize, okay, they are imperfect. Why have I been putting so much stock in the fact that they were inspired by God? One interesting change Rutherford made, by the way, was he took away singing. The Watchtower confirms that. From 1938 on to about 1944, singing wasn't really done. But I found that interesting because I remembered, and I looked it up as the 2017 Watchtower, but I remembered that singing was described as an integral part of pure worship, or of true worship. So Jehovah's Witnesses are basically admitting that they weren't pure worship, at least from 38 to 44. Anyway, and then I went to the next president and so on. I don't want to talk too much about them, but basically what I found was, again, I just couldn't see a distinction between Jehovah's Witnesses and their founders and the founders of a bunch of other religions, specifically even in that area of the United States and at that time. And then looking, like, for instance, the LDS, the Mormons, they had way more growth than Jehovah's Witnesses did. So I couldn't really even see God's blessing on Jehovah's Witnesses after that. And then, getting into these weird ideas of the pyramids, and Russell came up with this idea of divine inches that were 1.001 inches or something. It just kind of felt like a snake oil salesman, like someone trying to make things work and then saying, my books, you need them to understand God's will. And I believe he even said they would help you to understand God's message even more than just the Bible would. So was he just trying to grow his publishing company? That's kind of what was getting my doubts going. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jesus came, like, scoured the earth, investigated religions, found all of them to be wanting, and found Jehovah's Witnesses to be the true religion, chose the governing body, all this invisibly. It's a big claim, and I couldn't see any evidence of it. Now, believe it or not, I was so indoctrinated, I still, at this point, believe Jehovah's Witnesses must have the truth. Particularly, I thought to myself, they prophesied 1914, World War I, decades ahead of time. How could imperfect people do that? That had to be evidence of God's will. And so that was my next step. I was going to restore my faith, get stronger than ever by really looking at the 1914 prophecy and proving to myself that these were God's people. So in my next video, I'll talk about how lies in the publications help me see that Jehovah's Witnesses are not God's one true religion on earth. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye for now.